This week on The Futurists, Carl Bogan.
You know, it's funny you say that, Robert. Do you believe you're talking to me right now or someone else?
See, this is the element of doubt. I don't even know how to answer the question right now. So I think I'm talking to Carl Bogan, but maybe I'm not.
Well, technically, this is not deepfake audio. This is my voice, but this is absolutely not my face.
Welcome back to The Futurists. I'm your host, Brett King, and joining me in the hosting chair is Rob Tercek. Hey, Rob.
Hi. Good morning.
How's your week so far?
Everything's uncertain. We've got an election coming up, which means a lot of stuff's going to be hanging in the air for the next 6 months or 10 months as that gets resolved. And it's not just the U.S. There's elections in the UK and elsewhere. So a lot of stuff is pending. And, with that, there comes this other thing, which is interference in elections is a big issue. People are really nervous about the idea that, gosh, can we really trust our elections anymore? And certainly plenty of politicians have made the case that you can't trust elections. Sometimes that's self-serving. But there is this other issue, which is that technology is starting to change the way we understand politics and the way we talk about politics and so on.
A lot of transparency, like forced on the system, and you can see what's happening right now is an effort to sort of destabilize that a little bit and call into question,
manufacture
even
moments.
Just basic statistics.
You can manufacture political moments now.
But it even happened before it's happened. It happened with COVID. Right, in terms of the manipulation of data around that. Yeah, sure, it happened.
I mean, it happened with Brexit.
Well.
It happened with Trump's election campaign. It's been going on for quite a while. We're kind of getting used to it. It's like the new normal. But it does have a destabilizing effect. The problem is everybody gets jaded and they stop trusting. They stop knowing what to believe. So a couple of weeks ago, I had dinner with some friends, and the topic of security came up, and the question was, who can you trust and what can you trust? And in that conversation, one of the people at the dinner that the reason companies want people to go back to the office is that working from home creates so many vulnerabilities. It's such an attack surface for anyone that wants to get in and mess with a company or steal information and so on. And one of the people at dinner said, you can't really believe the people that you're talking to on Zoom are really the people they say they are. They could be anybody else. They could be somebody from.
Well, we've seen Zoom fraud in China, where you've got people pretending to be a relative stuck in jail and pleading for the relative to send money. And it's fake. Yeah.
Next year, you're going to get you're going to be on a Zoom call with someone you think is your boss. And he's going to say, listen, I need you to give me those login and access codes right now. This is urgent. And it's going to be your boss. So, of course, you're going to give it to that person. It might turn out that isn't actually your boss. So the person who explained this to me the best is Carl Bogan. And Carl's our guest this week. Carl, hi. Welcome to The Futurists. It's great to have you on the show.
Thanks. I'm glad to be here. Glad to talk about this.
I'm excited to talk to you because the topic of deep fakes has been going on for some time. I mean, really since 2016, 2015, it kind of broke out in the mainstream consciousness, but they were pretty bad. And I think people looked at them and were like, well, come on, this is a hacked out thing. It's obviously fake. But they've improved a lot, haven't they, recently?
Oh, they exponentially get better every 3 to 6 months.
Wow. And this is something that you're working on. Like right now, you're a kind of expert in deep fakes.
Expert's a funny word, but I would say among a room of people who know nothing, I'm absolutely an expert. But at the same time, I've dedicated my primary focus for the last 5 to 6 years on deepfake.
Well, that probably much makes you one of the top experts on this topic, Carl. You don't have to be as modest. Most of our guests are not as modest as you, so I'll say that. But what are the commercial applications? Like, obviously, we're talking about the fraud risks and so forth, but where are the big commercial applications in this right now in terms of the use of deepfakes? Is it replacing like traditional CGI and things like that for de-aging and things like that?
Sure. So that's the first area that we looked at. I was leading a startup effort over at Eliza.ai. And the first thing we looked at was stunt work and sort of allowing directors more control and flexibility while they're shooting instead of having to see the back of, Tom Cruise's head when he's jumping off of a building. Now, granted, in the case of Tom Cruise, he's probably doing his own stunts.
Yeah, true.
But most people are not because of insurance reasons or whatever. And so the DP and the director are handicapped in terms of not being able to shoot the shots they want. So they have to compromise unless they're going to spend a lot of money on digital doubles. So this reduces that cost by 70 to 80%, being able to shoot with your stunt performer, but replacing their face with the actor in real time.
Now, I've seen examples of that on film production where the body double or the body actor will wear a motion capture outfit, and they might even be on a green screen background. And so literally everything can be replaced. And then they only need the principal actors, to come in and do the face gestures and the dialogue, which can be captured really quickly. And then they kind of match that face onto the body actor's motion. But all that body is generated. All the actual animation is generated. So in a way, you could say superhero movies are basically big deep fakes. They're just super long, very intricate deep fakes.
Don't forget, very expensive deep fakes.
And they're rendered, so they take a long time to create. But the kinds of deep fakes we're concerned about in the news are real time. Like they're things you could literally do on a Zoom call.
It's funny you say that, Robert. Do you believe you're talking to me right now or someone else?
See, this is the element of doubt. I don't even know how to answer the question right now. So I think I'm talking to Carl Bogan, but maybe I'm not.
Well, technically, this is not deepfake audio. This is my voice, but this is absolutely not my face.
Ah, there you go.
It looks like my face. It tracks. We're running at 30 frames a second at HD quality, but this is not my face. Shall I turn it off?
Sure.
Okay. Do a little magic trick. And that. This is
oh my gosh, that's great. So for the folks who are listening to the podcast, what we just saw is Carl has been spoofing us the entire time. So to see the video, the face that he arrived with is very different from his real face.
Insane, dude.
And he just switched off the deep fake, but it was tracking with his face as he turned his head, as he looked up and down. I was actually impressed because I was looking to see your eye lines, because usually that's a way you can detect a deep fake. But your eye expressions, like when you open your eyes, you raise your eyebrows, and the direction of your eyes, that was actually pretty good. It was tracking really well. So that's a big improvement. And so for folks who are listening, unfortunately, you can't see this, but a lot of folks that are listening to the podcast.
We're going to put this out on social.
But that was a pretty good bit. Yeah. So,
because I've not met you, Carl, so I didn't know it wasn't your face.
Precisely, Brett. That's the point.
Yeah, that's true.
You can start to develop a relationship with someone who doesn't exist over Zoom. This is a scary thought.
Yes.
Now you could also bend your voice, right? So you've done this in the past where you were able to synthesize a voice and do that in real time as well.
Absolutely. So you can synthesize a face as well as a voice. You can, in the time in which you record this podcast, I'd have enough data on you, Robert, and it's already annotated that I'd be able to clone your voice, I don't know, a couple hours. So then I can just, I can record your face and your voice in the courses of Zoom call, and then tomorrow go host my own set of podcasts.
If you want, that might actually spare me some time. So I'm going to talk about that.
I mean,
get OpenAI to write the script.
The lip sync is really good as well. So your lip sync is noticeably better than the lip sync in most deep fakes. You can easily spot that the face gestures, the mouth gestures aren't exactly syncing with the voice.
That's correct.
And I would imagine with synthetic voice, that's even harder, right? Like now you're adding another layer of complexity to that. But if you're able to synchronize those things.
Well, the thing about detecting things that are wrong, I mean, ever since we're born, we open our eyes and we're just data collection machines more than anything. We're just collecting data. So it's really easy to feel, not necessarily know, but feel when something's not quite right. And that we call that the uncanny valley.
Yeah.
Right.
But most people disregard those innate feelings for, politeness, or they don't want to look silly, or are you a deep fake? They don't want to insult anyone. So they just
it'd be really weird thing. Prove you're real. Robert, wipe your hand across your face or something.
Exactly.
Verify your reality. But we're going to have to start doing that. So clearly, what you just showed us is so.
Yeah, but I mean, obviously the tech is getting so good that I could rub my hand in front of my face and still have a deep fake. You know, especially if you've got multiple tracking units and stuff like that, I'm sure. So that's the thing is like, how do we know what's real anymore? And this is a really interesting question to ask with this sort of digital sphere of influence, you know, whether it's AI or, deep fakes and so forth, is can we actually have an objective truth anymore, you know? I mean, that's the big philosophical question. I'm sorry to take it into this.
You just went about as macro as you can.
I'm ready.
I'm not asking you to solve it in the next 5 minutes, Carl, but
of course. Thank you. Yeah.
But I don't know. There's some pretty big issues with this, you know?
Well, I think the flip side is true though, Brett. Right now, just to flip around with your point, you can't trust any video that you see, right? I mean, I would say any motion picture today, even if it's a historical drama, is going to be digitally enhanced in some way. So every frame of motion picture is touched by some digital, process. They're going to enhance it in some fashion. I'm guessing that's going on in television because if it's real time, you can start doing that with the news. I don't think it's going to be long before we start to see synthetic people on the news. There's already a thing that launched a couple of weeks ago. Channel 1 is a synthetic news channel. So all the news is generated, the voices, the newscasters and so forth. It's a little boring, honestly. I looked at, if you look past the sizzle reel and watch it, it's actually kind of bland. It's like Muzak for news. But it's going to get better. Like your point, Brett, is all this stuff improves. And now I guess it's improving so fast that our ability to detect it is not improving. And so it's going to surpass our skills. Hey, Carl, what's your take on that? I mean, do you see this as a massive opportunity, and where do you see the opportunities?
It's a really big question because, any good technology is equal parts amazing and scary. And so on the positive side, there's tons of opportunities in terms of monetizing your celebrity status. If you don't want to get out of bed, if you want to be in 3 places at one time, if you want to bring back people who have passed to give speeches or just to re-give speeches, not even to make anything new, just so you can feel like you were there, for the Gettysburg Address. You feel like you're there for the I Have a Dream speech in VR. I mean, there's so many ways you can extract goodness from it, which is why I started on this quest to sort of be on the pro side, because there's tons of cons. I mean, the list of cons is much longer, to be honest, but the pro side is so positive that I would hate to leave it on the table.
Okay.
Well, I think, I'm not sure that we can stop it anyway. I don't know how, really, unless we can sort of have some sort of digital signature stuff and, authenticated content, things like that. But, have a watermark, is the concept that's being talked about. But, I mean, unless you've got like incredible encryption technology with that as well, the fact that someone could simulate watermarks in videos is obviously the next thing coming, right? So it's sort of like you're chasing your tail a bit on this technology. That's why I'm sort of asking the philosophical questions about this stuff, And I don't think the commercial incentives for developing these sort of technologies are so high that we're not pumping the brakes on this stuff where we could either, And that appears to be the pace, right?
We're not slowing down. If anything, we are speeding up. Of course, legislation is always behind technology. And so I would imagine that something, not catastrophic, but something really bad has to happen before we really put our hands around its throat and say,
I get that.
It's illegal.
Yeah. You bring up legislation. And one of the things that comes up on this show a lot is how might we regulate technology? And there isn't really a great answer. And as you can see, just with the topic of artificial intelligence in almost every country, they're trying to figure out what the right approach is without stifling innovation and losing jobs. So that's the balance. But I would say also in the United States, we're not very good at drafting legislation to regulate any industry. Every time we do it in the last 20 or 30 years, it ends up the industries get more consolidated, more dominated, prices go up, consumer satisfaction goes down. So regulation has sort of a weird, perverse outcome. I'm not quite sure if we can regulate our way out of this, because imagine what you're really saying is the ability to manipulate video should be governed. Well, there are a lot of constituencies in the motion picture industry. They're going to fight hard for that. They're going to want to preserve it or carve out something. But then there's this other issue, which is if one jurisdiction outlaws something or regulates it heavily, the business just moves to another jurisdiction. The companies move someplace else, right? So you can produce deepfakes anywhere. You know, the last thing that crossed my mind as we were talking about this is, you know, those junk phone calls you get, the spam phone calls that people hate. Everybody hates those AI phone calls. We've been having them for
robocalls
7 or 8 years, and now it basically makes your phone unusable. Well, that can be stopped. That actually could be stopped at the carrier. The phone companies actually have the ability to do that. And yet there's no meaningful regulation. So, you know, voters in every country hate this and they would love to stop it. But the legislation doesn't pass any laws because guess who is a big user of robocalling? To do push
politicians.
The politicians. So they don't want to deprive themselves of a tool or a weapon. They don't want it to deprive themselves of something they need in their campaign to get reelected. This is going to be the same thing with deepfakes. You know it. As much as it's awful to be on the receiving end of one of them, and it's impossible to erase that image from someone's mind. On the flip side, it's going to be incredibly useful for a politician that wants to do some opposition stuff against their opponent. So they're not going to want to outlaw it. I know this is the problem.
It's just like you can see where this is going. It's like a train wreck in slow motion, right? You know?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
but,
that's absolutely. So like you can then assume we're going to get a lot of deepfakes. We got an election year coming up in the United States.
Oh yeah.
Election year coming up in the UK as well. And so in both countries, you're going to see a flood of, and actually, you know, the United States, the NSA and the FBI have already issued a warning. In the UK, there's been a warning from their security group. The U.S. Justice Secretary issued a warning. Brett was just sharing with me a deep fake. This is quite interesting. You know, Vladimir Putin in Russia often every year will do this kind of annual thing where he takes questions from citizens. And this year, one person zoomed in. They did it over video. And it was a deep fake interviewing, like asking a question of the Russian president.
Yeah, 8 days ago.
And Brett and I were both thinking, like, that person's not going to be alive for long. He'll be falling out of a window in the near future.
Yeah, probably not.
You also see this in India.
Putin was not impressed. He was not at all impressed.
You can see this sort of shadow goes across his face. He's like, well, he gets that intense look of like, track that person down. But also, this is a big issue in India and some other countries. Any big democracy is going to find that their deepfakes are going to be prevalent, right? They're so easy and so fast to make. You know, Carl, today, how easy is it for a non-expert, like a citizen or a consumer, to go out and make a deepfake?
You know, it's actually there's a barrier, but if you have the right Sherpa, more or less, you can make one in about 2 days. I normally or regularly do conferences where I will teach a room of people who have never made a deepfake before, much less have used Windows to make deepfakes in about 2 days. So the first day I just walk them through the data. First, we think about what we're going to do. You know, what narrative do you want to say? Because that's super important. What are you trying to, what message are you trying to carry across with the two people you're choosing? And then we go through data collection. We go through shooting it on their cell phones. You don't need a Hollywood camera for this. We use consumer grade hardware. The last one I did, we used, I don't know, 6-year-old laptops that had a 1000 series in NVIDIA in it, which is old at this point. You make a model specifically for that card, and then you run it. And then overnight, they come back in the morning, and then we walk them through compositing and how to composite it, make it look real. And then you render it out, and then you're finished. Now you know how to make deepfakes.
Oh, okay. So this is pre-rendered. This is something that you can't do in real time.
That's more of the storytelling aspect. You can take that exact same model that you pre-rendered and then run it in real time.
Right. Because it's like once you've got the model, you can
once you got the model, you can run the inference in real time.
Oh, so wow. I know Scorsese, did that movie with De Niro and Pacino, not that long ago. Right, The Irishman, right, that was it. Where they used a similar technology to this. But, obviously now it's getting, a lot more accessible. But maybe just before we go to break, Carl, what was it that made you get into this space in the first place?
Brett, I stumbled into machine learning and deepfakes. I know a lot of people went to school for it, and they are, great math students. I was a 20-year VFX veteran that was using deepfake to solve a problem of animation for 3D. And so we had 3D characters that we're creating for digital influencers, but we needed to make a move, but we couldn't pay VFX budgets because it's a startup. And so I created this process in order to make a data set out of 3D, put it in a 2D format, and then run inference through that with GPUs and machine learning. And that's how deepfakes began for me.
Right.
And so what happens is now, if you have a 3D bust to say Thanos, instead of having Josh Brolin sit around for hours and hours and make all these facial shapes and so forth, in about half an hour, you can take Josh Brolin's, you interview him, you take all the data from Thanos, and then you can now generate Thanos for 80% cheaper than over traditional.
And if you have the voice print, you can actually get him to say new dialogue as well.
1,000%.
So we're going to start to see old dead actors. I'm supposing Elvis Presley and Marilyn Monroe. We're going to exhume these poor dead actors. We're not going to let them rest. We're going to put them back to work.
Thank you very much.
As kind of digital labor, and they're going to work in perpetuity to generate entertainment for us. What a wonderful world we're in. Oh my goodness gracious.
Well, that's a whole other conversation about, allowing for your rights to be used.
It's interesting. Robin Williams wrote this into his will. I don't think it really probably means anything today because his estate has control of it. If his estate decides to use his digital image, then they probably can. But the fact was, he was thinking about that way back then. So pretty interesting. But
well, imagine you have all your causes, your scholarship foundations, your charities you give to, that when you pass, all that money goes away. But does it have to, is the question. And I don't think anyone's really asked that yet.
Oh, that's interesting. So you could perpetually fund a charitable organization with your likeness.
That's correct.
You're a famous celebrity. That's actually that's
doing good after you're dead.
Yeah. Oh, makes sense. All right. Well, listen, let's take a quick break. You're listening to The Futurists. We're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back with Carl Bogan as we talk about the future of deep fakes and real-time image manipulation. You're listening to The Futurists. We'll be right back. Provoke Media is proud to sponsor, produce, and support the Futurist podcast. Provoke.fm is a global podcast network and content creation company with the world's leading fintech podcast and radio show, Breaking Banks. And of course, its spin-off podcasts, Breaking Banks Europe, Breaking Banks Asia Pacific, and the FinTech 5. But we also produce the official Finovate podcast, Tech on Reg, Emerge Everywhere, the podcast of the Financial Health Network, and Next Gen Banker. For information about all our podcasts, go to provoke.fm or check out Breaking Banks, the world's #1 fintech podcast and radio show.
Welcome back to The Futurists. I'm Rob Tercek, and my co-host is Brett King. And this week we're talking to Carl Bogan. Carl Bogan started out in the visual effects or video effects business and stumbled into machine learning and deep fakes as a way to generate characters or improve the animation process much more cost effectively. And Carl's been sharing with us some of the implications of that work of deep fakes. But Carl, you have a second career, if you will, or a second kind of offshoot of your activity, which is more creative. It's in a way, it's like your artistic expression. And that's a website for the folks who are listening called Mr. Giraffe. And it's spelled Mr. with a Y. Mr. Giraffe is where you do art mashups. Tell us a little bit about these mashups.
Sure. So when I first started seeing deepfakes, I didn't see anything that reflected anything that I could connect with. Nothing that I really thought that really touched me deeply. Mm-hmm. And so I sought out the opportunity to tell stories that I wanted to tell for pop culture, essentially, or a large swath that was left out. So, who were some of the biggest names at the time? That was going to be Will Smith and Cardi B. Mm-hmm. And so I found an interview of Cardi B sitting down talking to Kimmel, I believe it was. And then I noticed that she was wearing the exact same, or very, very close to the same dress that Will Smith wore in Wild Wild West when he was cosplaying as a woman in order to get away from the big spider guy. And so I figured I'd mash them up. Not really knowing where it was going to go. I mean, Mr. Giraffe started as sort of a scratch paper for when I was learning how to do it on the characters.
Right.
But I found it so fascinating, interesting. When other things were sort of processing, I would work on this in the meantime. So when I posted it for the first time, I didn't think it was going to go anywhere. I asked people at the company, "Oh, do you think does it have any value?" And they're like, "I don't really know. I don't know. It's all right." 24 hours later, Will Smith had reposted it. Cardi B had reposted it. I had, thousands of new fans. I was inundated with emails and DMs. I really just couldn't believe it. And since then, I just haven't been able to stop.
Oh, that's really fun. Now, how did they respond? How did Will Smith and Cardi B respond? Because just for the people who are listening, the mashup we're talking about is a late night TV show host interviewing Cardi B about her nickname, which I guess turns out was Bacardi, and that was the origin. At least that's the story she tells. But halfway through that clip, she turns into Will Smith in a dress. And it's really uncanny. I like to use the term uncanny valley. It's deeply weird because Will Smith is basically speaking with Cardi B's voice, but it's clearly Will Smith, but it's kind of like a blend of the two. I mean, it's very artfully done. It's a little bit disorienting because you're like, wait, what is this? Is it Will Smith doing, that part blew my mind. So it's certainly worth checking it out. You'll find it on the Mr. Giraffe website. How did they respond? How did Will Smith feel about showing up in that video?
Will Smith loved it.
Great.
In the comments, he went so far as to say, "I don't know who did this, but whoever they are, they're hired." But since it was my very first deep fake posting, I wasn't very good at protecting. It was me. So there were other people who were creating pages trying to take credit for it. I mean, the internet works very, very, very quickly, especially the parts that aren't so great. And so I never was able to get in touch with Will Smith, but I believe it does. I believe it still holds the third most watched video on all of Will Smith's Instagram.
Wow, that's cool.
That's all right.
And you've done.
What have you got against Steve Harvey?
Yeah, Steve.
Looking at your
Oh
page.
yes, I love Steve Harvey. I actually met with Steve after the first one. I think it was May 2020, and I met with Steve Harvey's team because they loved it. And
cool.
We were talking about developing a series and so on and so forth. But that wasn't the direction I was headed in at the time. So
fair enough.
So
some interesting stuff.
What do you think the application of this kind of mashup might be? It seems like a new kind of, it's great for social media, right? So it's a great promotional thing. But then again, some of these actors and performers, it's not really their message it's not really on brand for them, right? So it's funny because it's so incongruous. Is there any artist that you think would adopt this and make that part of their persona? Do you see that as a new kind of social media personality type, a synthetic actor?
Absolutely. So part of the quest has been to get as many reposts as I can. And that's tricky because if you look at someone like The Rock, I would do a deep dive and I'd look at their page and say, how seriously do they take themselves? How seriously do they take their social media? And you quickly realize there's a pretty deep comparison between the ones who reposted it and the ones who didn't. And you can tell just by looking at how seriously they take their feed.
Yeah.
And so some people treat it like a business and some people treat it like an extension of themselves. And so I tend to move towards or work with the latter because, The Rock, God bless him, he's never going to repost anything with him on Mariah Carey singing Heartbreaker, which is another one that I did. But, you have to experiment. You're going through the process. And
does anyone ever send you like a cease and desist or a takedown notice? Does anyone object?
I have yet to get a cease and desist.
And wow.
That's
okay. So they're delighted.
The tenets of Mr. Giraffe is to make fun, but don't be mean.
Yeah. It's like non-destructive parody. I get it.
That's correct.
And honestly, it's actually kind of cool because people watch it and they laugh and they get a kick out of it. So it's an opportunity for that celebrity to show that they can lighten up and not take it serious.
It's actually got me thinking as you're talking about all this stuff about, where can we trace deep fakes back to? And what I think is probably the start of sort of us thinking about this was that Michael Jackson video, the black and white with the face morphology stuff, where the faces were morphing. Now the voice was matched to that, and that was obviously just done with a whole lot of very laborious filming and work and so forth. But
rotoscoping, hand by frame by frame.
I know.
It holds up too.
But now we thinking back, it sort of say that could have, that could be, part of sort of the birth of this stuff, or even the depiction in Running Man. Remember when Arnold Schwarzenegger's face was put on the other body and stuff? We've been thinking about doing this stuff for a long time. Pretty interesting.
Absolutely. And now it's funny how the technology that we see, years go by. It's almost like we're on a quest to create our ideas that we see in front of us.
Yeah. Well, I think, there is an argument, and we've had that argument presented on the show numerous times, that, science fiction can be a template for a lot of technological developments, we
bring a lot of science fiction authors on the show for that reason, right?
Yeah, exactly.
They're the ones, every person we talk to is inspired by some sci-fi experience, whether it's a movie or a book. And that's not just true for this show. If you talk to anyone that's involved in, say, space or aerospace, they're all science fiction fans, right? They were inspired to do that by sci-fi. So sometimes we'll bring the authors on the show and ask them a little bit about that. It's an interesting thing because they don't really wear that responsibility. That's not something they really want to take credit for. Not all of them. Like, they don't want to be known as the guy who invented the telecommunications satellite or whatever. But there is that element, though, that people are really inspired by the stories they read. So you're right, like Brett, we've been playing with the idea of swapping faces in movies for decades, but now it's quite possible to do. Now, I imagine that the Screen Actors Guild is aware of this technology, and I would imagine that they're pretty concerned. And for the folks who don't remember, this fall we had kind of a big showdown here in Los Angeles between the motion picture companies and the Screen Actors Guild.
This was at the heart of this debate.
Yeah, they're worried about being replaced by an AI. Carl, how likely do you think that is? Do you think we can get to a point where we don't even need human actors?
I think we will get to a point where we don't need human actors, but I will say that there's something intangible that we're not aware of yet that makes humans human on screen.
What are the limitations of the deep fakes? Like, what are they
today?
Emotional range? Are they not being able to be unpredictable or spontaneous?
Right now, deep fakes are limited to the actor piloting them.
Mm-hmm.
And so right now, I don't believe there's any limitations as far as wearing someone else's face, so long as you have collected the right amount of data. Which is why when I'm taking data sets, I add, instead of having them make faces or give me your scared face, which is not your real scared face, the emotions don't line up because humans are far more complex. So I ask instead questions about, tell me about the very first date you went on. That one question alone is full of like rich emotions and facial expressions and, like muscles reacting in ways that you can't get asking people to make faces. Right. And so sometimes I ask really sad questions. And
you're recording this with a camera, or are you recording this with his motion capture? Like, what are you?
It's very simple, Robert. You can use a cell phone. You can use a DSLR. You can use a Red. It's really unimportant, generally speaking, because at the end of the day, you're taking the pixels and you're turning those pixels into numbers. And so, sure, you can use, you don't want to use necessarily like a GoPro, but you could if you wanted to, if you were in a pinch. And I don't think it would, really matter so much. So
interesting.
Yeah.
No, my iPhone has 3 cameras on it
as you can into the process.
This iPhone has 3 cameras on it because it's designed to capture space, dimension, facial geometry for face recognition and so forth. Are you able to capture that and use that in a deep fake? Is that part of the data set?
I'm going to tell you something about iPhones. They look great. It's one of my favorite things to use when I'm recording data.
Wow.
Oftentimes, if I'm flying across the country to go take someone's data set, I bring a nicer DSLR, but I'll use pickups with an iPhone. Something about the way they interpret their images is just really, really beautiful and natural.
Interesting.
You notice that when you use the face recognition to unlock the phone, that under a variety of circumstances, you can be wearing a hat, sunglasses, regular glasses, motorcycle goggles, a mask, and it still recognizes your facial geometry. And I think that's kind of astounding. During the pandemic, it didn't work with a mask on, and then after a couple of months, they figured it out, and then suddenly it did work with a mask on. All right, let's think about
you're still getting some false positives for African American skin types and Asian skin types and things. There is some problems with their models, primarily because it's been trained on white data. Californian faces, right? So
that's right.
Yeah.
That's the perennial problem with all AI, is the flaws in the data set. How big are your data models? Like, how big are these things to capture when you capture them? Are they lightweight or are they gigantic?
They're pretty lightweight, I think, as far as images or actual like drive size.
Well, the stuff that you capture, and then when you turn it into once you create the model, both. I'm interested in both.
Sure. So I take about 30 minutes of footage. I boil that down to about 15,000 images at a 30 frame base, which ends up being, I can't do the math on top of my head, but I mean, it's less than 30 minutes. And so you take all the data, you go through, you clean it up, you comb through, any of the hands moving in front of the faces, you clean up, if their head is, too low, too high, you can also use machine learning to sort through the images automatically and take out the stuff you don't want. But it's still pretty manual process, but I would say 0 to 1, I can create a data set in about an hour casually. It doesn't really take that long. And then you have it forever.
This is like, this is like professional grade technology, but it's certainly available to consumer scale. Like people can actually do this themselves. Okay, so let's talk about the future, because Microsoft, interestingly, Microsoft has two things here, related topics. They introduced a thing called Valley 3. Valley 3 is a voice clone, and it only needs 3 seconds of your voice to generate a very plausible voice clone of someone else. So this is quite scary, because there's 3 seconds of anybody's voice available anywhere. But the second thing is Microsoft also opened an election communications hub, and this is to alert the community about election fraud, and particularly deep fakes. So it's kind of weird. On the one hand, they're like the arms dealer; they're selling the technology, and on the other hand, they're trying to alarm people and make them aware. But maybe that's promotional. Maybe the two drive each other. What do you think is going to happen this year in the election as we gear up for the 2024? It's already contentious. There's already crazy claims on both sides. People are slinging mud at each other. What do you think is going to happen around the time of the primaries in just a couple of months?
Specifically on the deep fake front, yeah.
Robert, I really tried not to be too negative because there's enough of that going around.
Right.
But I will say I'm not overly optimistic. I see a lot of misinformation, even from outside of the country. I would argue that most people, when they wake up, they're good, but also a lot of people have financial motivations. I mean, hell, even if I got a call from the RNC or the DNC tomorrow and said, here's $13 million, we need you to have this person say this person, I'd have to think long and hard about it. And so, I don't know specifically what's going to happen, but my guess is there is going to be several clips that will make it sort of out of the pen, that will then have to be walked back by so on and so forth. And that will really begin the misinformation.
So I'm assuming that's going to happen, right? I think everybody assumes we're going to see a lot of deep fakes, and some will be good, some will be junky, but there'll be some very good ones. And you're right, it'll create a problem for that particular politician who has to distance themselves from that image, whatever thing it was saying. But
they can. I mean, politicians will be able to claim anything that isn't squeaky clean. They'll be able to claim it's fake.
This is exactly right, Brett. That's exactly where I was heading, is that you're going to see the very next pivot will be to say, oh, that's a fake, right? I didn't do that. I didn't actually say it. In a way, Trump does this already, right? I mean, he's like, oh, that's fake news. And so what ends up happening is people get jaded and cynical. Like voters get jaded and cynical, and they sort of respond, as you hear people say today, I don't trust any politicians. They're all liars. Both parties are the same. Whether or not that's true, that's what people tend to say, right? So people just get overexposed to this stuff, and they get kind of overwhelmed. They don't want to do the work to sort it out. And so I think what it ends up doing, my guess, is we're going to massively scale confirmation bias. in the sense that you'll believe what you want to believe, whatever conforms with your existing bias. You're going to see those videos and be like, yeah, that's exactly what I'm talking about. That right there. Yeah. Someone else will say, no, that's fake. It's not true. And you'll be like, no. And so we'll have this like widening split in the United States in particular, but other democracies as well. You're going to see a widening split between people who just basically are in their separate camps and they just look for any available evidence, whether it's true or fake, that reinforces their viewpoint.
Call me cynical, Rob, but it appears now like there's a very clear intent to create that environment where people are chronically divided. And I believe it's because of these big philosophical issues we'll be facing over the next 20 to 30 years that, the powers that be realize they don't have the ability to fix these problems. So rather than take the blame for the fact that there are these big issues, AI, climate change, etc., well, let's get people divided and they'll fight amongst themselves and blame each other for the problems. Call me cynical, but...
No, I think you're right. Look, I'll jump out there because Carl ain't going to say it because he's positive, but, the Republican Party can't win a national election based on demographics. So they need other ways to win an election. And one way they do that is they get people riled up about stuff that just isn't true. I mean, they generate fake issues. You see this in Congress all the time. They're doing phony investigations and phony impeachment process and stuff. And it's like cosplay version of democracy. And so, first of all, I don't blame people for being jaded because you look at these clowns in Congress and you go, geez, these guys aren't really serious about legislating. All right. So that's our opinion on the thing. We're not really letting Carl get a word in edgewise. Carl, you see, we can do the show without you. You're just like,
no, it's fine. I'm listening. I'm taking it in. I love hearing the opinions of others. It helps shape my own.
Give us a view of where this goes, though. Give us a picture of the.
Well, take us 10, 20 years in the future. Yeah.
10, 20 years in the future, it will be a lot of cat and mouse, sort of like how viruses were created. You have your antivirus and someone makes a new virus. Someone has to update their definition or the glossary of definitions of the virus. And then, people are harmed by the first initial virus, then they update it again, then someone makes a new virus, and it just keeps going back and forth until someone creates a better mousetrap. Sort of like how Spotify, I guess I'll give them the credit, getting rid of pirating. When there's an easier solution for people to have to go with, they will not do the wrong thing. And so also as, consumer hardware gets cheaper and faster, it's getting even easier to make deepfakes every single day, even from your cell phone. They're not as convincing, but give it time. I think it will be more harm than good, but the entertainment that we'll get out of it will be top tier.
People are going to make good entertainment. That's for sure true. One thing I was thinking is on the politics side is you can imagine politicians having kind of like a personality lab. Take someone who a politician with a kind of a bad personality, and I'm going to pick on Ron DeSantis.
That's who I was thinking.
Well, he's been called out for it so much, right? So Ron DeSantis is, he kind of comes across.
Can you give him a personality transplant?
Really guy, exactly. So imagine if quietly in the background, totally confidentially, he had a team that was developing a range of deep fakes, different personalities. And they could test these on 5,000 people at a time in social media and start to gauge the interest and engagement level and start to go like, hey, look.
Yeah, because you theoretically,
you might present yourself, and
that's actually not a very bad idea. You can honestly do that now. I know actors, they get hurt, they have some surgery and they're out of the public eye and people are like, oh, what's going on? Where have they been? You can soften that blow and completely get rid of it if you just have a body double. If I were famous, I'd have a body double follow me around all the time. And when I need them to go to Prague to shoot a commercial or to go somewhere else, I would just send them while I lay in bed, eat ice cream or do whatever else I feel like doing, go on vacation. The cycle doesn't have to stop just because you're not there anymore. So that's possible today.
In a way, that's how we use social media, right? If you think of what social media is for a lot of people, they're trying on different personalities and they're sort of pretending to be like, influencers or pretending to be global travelers or people who are really into food or fashion or something. And they're gauging public response to that. And then that might be in a direction they evolve more into. So in a weird way, this by networking, deep fakes and synthetic reality, what we're really doing is starting to shape reality. We're using the network as a way to get the signal from other people about what they want, what they're attracted to, what gets them excited or engaged. And then we'll go make more of that and eventually become that thing in the real world. I know that sounds crazy.
I mean,
that's actually how it's working, right?
I mean, if you think about this, think about the possibilities. If you think about VR worlds, right? And if VR worlds get good enough that you have an approximation of our reality in terms of our face and so forth, actors could allow you to play them in the VR. You could buy an avatar of Brad Pitt and
drive it around with,
you got to do that in Call of Duty.
But actually, I was going to say, Brad, we don't even need VR. Like, we're kind of doing that now. Right. It's social media with, filters. If you think like Snapchat, the filters that you can put on your face, and they're
right.
very simple AR.
It's getting close to that stuff.
There's a whole generation growing up with it. The big scary thing here is increasingly people are turning to services like TikTok to get their news, right? So anybody who's under 30, TikTok is a primary source of news, which is a little weird for people our age because you're like, wait, that's not news. It's just a bunch of generated crap. But that's the point. That's their version of news. And they also use it as a search engine, which is like, wait, what? And for health advice. And so you're thanks. I think you're going to see channels like that flooded with this stuff. And it's a very cheap way it's like a scratch test. You can just, crank out dozens and dozens of these models and test them out and see which ones respond or which ones test the best, and then double down on that. So it's like a kind of multivariate testing environment. And you can just test X number of iterations of a concept. But any kind of conceptual person, doesn't have to be a politician, could also be a celebrity, could be a musician, and so forth. So we're going to be able to try out personas.
The new spin.
And then the real world will start to conform to that synthetic version. I mean, I think this is what's happening now. I don't even know if that's so. I know, Brett, we want to go futuristic, but I'm kind of like,
no, I get it. No, yeah. I mean, we don't have to go too far in the future, do we?
I mean, I would even say that's how you end up with super celebrities that are created because of farm data, or like you're able to try out.
What was that movie where Dustin Hoffman created this female computer character or whatever, and she became this movie star and rock star? Simone. Yeah, like that's what we're talking about. That sort of thing.
I think it is. I think we're here, right?
Yeah.
And the funny thing is, everybody thinks that like VR is something that's happening out there in the future, or the metaverse is going to happen in a few years. And it's like, dude, it's going on right now on TikTok.
It doesn't matter. Yeah,
and people like Carl are making it possible. Right? They're making it possible for us to bend reality. Well, Carl, what a fun conversation to have with you. Thank you so much for joining us on the show. For the folks who are listening, you should check out Carl's website. You can search carlbogan.com, but also go to mrgiraffe.com. And that's Mr. with a Y. So MYSTER giraffe.com. Carl, thanks for joining us.
Of course. Thank you for having me.
Great fun talking to you today. So folks, we are really thrilled with the progress of the show. We love the audience response that we're getting. People are digging the concepts and the guests. That's fun for us. We welcome comments and questions.
Yeah, leave us a review if you can. Give it, post on social. All that stuff helps us.
And we're always interested in hearing people's suggestions for different kinds of futurists to bring on the show and talk to them about how they're shaping the future. So we welcome that as well. To wrap up this week, let me give a shout out to Kevin Hershon, who's been patiently helping us as our engineer, audio editor, and making the show sound great for the whole year. Thank you, Kevin. Thank you to Elizabeth Severance, our producer, and the whole crew at Provoke Media. You make the show possible. So that's it for this week. We'll be back next week with another futurist. And until then, we'll see you in the future. Well, that's it for The Futurists this week. If you like the show, we sure hope you did. Please subscribe and share it with the people in your community. And don't forget to leave us a 5-star review. That really helps other people find the show. And you can ping us anytime on Instagram and Twitter at Futurist Podcast for the folks that you'd like to see on the show or the questions that you'd like us to ask. Thanks for joining. And as always, we'll see you in the future.